If Charlie Kirk is a fascist, then fascism is clearly not as bad as I would have thought.
We can just clarify what we mean by the term. What do you understand fascism to be, and does Charlie Kirk fit the bill?
The reason I've come here is because my primary concern is how most people use the term. Right? We're in a meme war. My working theory is that because fascism is being used in a very loose way.
Wait, hang on a second.
Not by specific individuals,
but
on the whole.
I just want to say, like, is it being used in a loose way? That's a claim. In order to make the claim that fascism, the word, is being used in a loose way, you would have to have a self-standing notion of fascism by which to compare. Tell me if I'm wrong, that I'm sensing some trepidation about clearly demarcating fascism or adjacent terms, getting a proper understanding of their scope. Because if I were to do that, I think that there are uncomfortable entailments that follow.
In order to fulfill my goals, which are communicate with people who are Charlie Kirk sympathizers, calling him a fascist would prevent me from being able to reach them in ways that I think are valuable.
Right. So because I want to reach them, I'm not going to call him a fascist, even if he is. Hey, folks, please like, comment, and subscribe, and make sure to check out my newsletter. Information is in the description. What up? PF Jung. Do you go by PF Jung in this kind of like interpersonal conversation style?
No, I like Paul.
You like Paul? All right. What up, Paul? A lot of Pauls lately.
It's a good name.
Yeah.
Wrote the Bible. Good actor, Giamatti.
Oh shit! Who's your favorite actor, Paul?
Giamatti's the only one I actually know. Giamatti. I guess Paul Walker.
He's dead though.
But he's dead, and I've also never seen any of his movies. So
yeah, sorry about that. You never seen Fast and the Furious?
No, there's too many of them.
Damn.
Too many. It's like I see a podcast that's 4 hours long. I'm not watching it. If there's 12 Fast and Furiouses, I'm not watching any of them.
Well, I have to say, PF Jung, Paul, that it was a pleasure talking to you the other day. Maybe a little frustrating. This was about a few months ago that we last spoke. I think it had to do about Trump stuff, immigration stuff, potentially. But you reached out to me to have some, I guess, deeper conversations about the executive power under the Constitution.
I'm on a research arc here.
Yeah.
You know, all these fuckers talking about vibes-based analysis. It's ridiculous. It's anti-intellectual. It's disgusting. I would never support it.
Of course not.
And I'm on a facts and logic arc, which requires me to do research and talk to people who are actually informed on things.
I appreciate that. What can I, if you don't mind me asking, what like sort of stroked your curiosity, and what research mission are you on?
Because the people like Curtis Yarvin and the people on the new right and the post-liberal right push for this idea of a centralized executive. And they keep making arguments that this is basically the model that they use for the kind of power they want to afford to the president is someone like FDR or Teddy Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln. And that's odd to me because no one would consider those monarchs. No one would consider us not a democracy under FDR. In fact, many people would say that was the height of American democracy with FDR. So
is it a semantic conversation, one where you're like, well, I don't know why you call yourselves monarchs? So we're referencing Curtis Yarvin here, who is, a philosopher for some of these tech bros, for some of this new right-wing movement type people. I think is a little cringe myself, but I think that they make these allusions or at least references to monarchy, and are you trying to like disprove them that, hey, you don't actually believe in monarchy, or your archetype here isn't a monarchist?
I'm trying to understand specifically, because I asked one guy, Dave Green, the distributist, who you might have an interesting conversation with, now that I think about it. But I was making this claim that there just needs to be more, like when people talk about dictator and CEO monarch, they're using all these terms that are obviously charged. But the model they have in mind is someone like FDR, and that I'm trying to understand if they're actually correct on the degree to which FDR governed like a unitary executive. But I don't know. We can talk for like 20 minutes or something. I just have some generic questions.
Ask me.
Unitary executive theory. Donald Trump was called a fascist, and Bill Barr was called a fascist, and all this stuff for trying to centralize all of the executive power under the executive agency. There are certain agencies that are already entirely under the executive control. I don't know which ones exactly, But then there are other agencies that are set up by Congress. I think like the FTC maybe, or and maybe the SEC are like independent agencies established by Congress that the executive agency can direct, but doesn't have complete control over. Is this a crackpot theory, or does this have legal precedent, or is this reasonable, or what?
If by crackpot legal theory you mean that it is sort of a fringe theory, the answer is no. If what you mean is like, has it been uptaken by many members of the bar and of the academy, the answer is yes. It used to be a lot less popular than it is now, but I would say it commands a supermajority on the Supreme Court at this moment. So the unitary executive theory is a particular vision of Article 2 of the Constitution. Article 2 is the part where they set up the presidency, modeled in some parts to make the point to the monarchy point like a little more clear. There are some elements of the king's power that are thought of to embody the president. For example, the power to pardon. But it was modeled after George Washington and with him in mind as the first chief executive. So the theory of the unitary executive is that this vesting clause of the executive branch and the executive power under Article 2 vests all of the executive power with under the president, the person of the president, and basically attempts by other branches to dilute the all-encompassed self-contained power, the executive power vested in the president, that those are anathema to the Constitution. You asked, is it like an out there theory? No, because now most of the Supreme Court stands by it. And so they're the final arbiter on what the Constitution means. So the answer is no. The unitary executive theory is here to stay. It's embodied in certain opinions, such as Trump versus United States. This is the criminal immunity decision, among others. And recently, there have been more direct assaults on prior precedents that seemingly are not in line with the unitary executive theory. Chief among them, this case called Humphrey's Executor from back in the day, actually from when FDR was the president. So the overview is unitary executive theory is that the entirety of the executive power is vested in one person, that is the president, and that the other branches really should not be touching that. And that is not anymore a cringe theory because it has been uptaken. Well, I think it still is cringe, but it's not a crackpot theory because it is now, I would say, the consensus view among the Supreme Court, which probably makes it the consensus view among practitioners, and because they're going to have to follow the dictates of that court.
Do you think it's okay? Forget now the degree to which, like the Supreme Court validates it, but just evaluating the theory on the merits, on its face, is it fascistic? Is someone who can you be a strong supporter of the unitary executive, and not be a fascist?
Yes, of course. Scalia is not a fascist, in my opinion. This is Antonin Scalia. He was one of the major proponents of unitary executive theory. And I would say that his support of it has more to do with some kind of legal formalism, where he really likes these separated categories and these hermetically sealed categories. And so he was a lone dissent in a case called Morrison v. Olson, which approved the constitutionality of the independent counsel statute. This is the same statute that was used for this investigator against Bill Clinton during his time in office. And I would say because ultimately unitary executive theorists premise their beliefs, at least the ones in good faith, that the president is ultimately answerable to the people, right? The whole notion of the unitary executive theory, one of the policy reasons in support of it is because they think the Constitution requires it, and the Constitution is the ultimate bedrock of our democracy. So whatever the Constitution says, if you believe in the Republic and in the will of the people who ratify the Constitution, you have to accept the unitary executive theory. So that's one way in which they would say it's consistent with democracy. The second way they would say is it's these unelected bureaucrats. That's the problem with democracy. When you're letting Congress set up these multi-member commissions where there's protection and insulation from removal by the president, if you're letting Congress set up these independent agencies where the heads can't be fired by the president, where's the democratic input into what those agencies are doing? Surely the president is the one way in which the executive branch is going to be tailored to the will of the people. And isn't there a fascism inherent in having no connection between the elected member of the executive branch and all of his subordinates? I don't agree with those notions, but those are actual ideas that are that can be aligned with unitary executive theory. And so, no, just because you're a unitary executive theorist doesn't mean you're a fascist. In fact, I would say that many good faith unitary executive theorists premise their entire policy argument on more appealing to democracy and institutions and constitutional framework.
Interesting. So the real fascists are the people that oppose unitary executive theory.
I didn't go that far. I'm gonna
make a video called "The Real Fascists Are Those Who Oppose Trump," and then I'll clip this and cite you defending this.
Well, this is the reason why people accuse them of being fascists, is because I don't think that many of the Yarvinites or many of the people who are citing unitary executive theory are doing so because of the policy arguments grounded, by Scalia or these other people, or because they think the Constitution requires it. The reason I don't think that is because they're willing to jettison the Constitution in other places. And so I think that a lot of the people, the Project 2025 folks, don't have this commitment to the Constitution to be read the right way, don't have this commitment to perfect alignment democratically, but they're using unitary executive theory, I think, in bad faith to align with their ultimate political interest, which is essentially more unitary government overall under one guy. And so just because it's possible for unitary executive theorists to maintain that belief as well as non-fascism, it's also possible, I think, more common among at least the Project 2025 types or the people currently in government, to view the unitary executive theory as a means to an end. If there were some other theory that would align with their political interest, or if they were saying, for example, let's say Obama was president, I don't think that these people would be arguing that Obama is a unitary executive theory that can do whatever he wants. So I think that it's not a principled position for a lot of these people.
Yeah, the unitary executive theory is within the American legal framework as such. Yeah,
and
which doesn't apply to people who want to move beyond it. We'll get to fascism in a minute here, but the argument now that is constantly made of, like, FDR governed like a monarch.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, if Trump was doing what FDR or Teddy Roosevelt did or said, it would be, well, we don't have everyone. Trump's a fascist already, according to everyone. So there's no other words that can be used, but it would be indisputable by anyone that he's a fascist. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt, said things like, "I don't give a fuck about the claims that I have usurped my power. Not only was I right to do it, I've established a good precedent moving forward." And FDR, in his fireside chats, there was one quote of something to the effect of, like, we're not going to allow, he was threatening to pack the court,
mm-hmm.
right? Because they kept striking down all of his New Deal programs. And he said something to the effect of, we will not allow, fearful men who are afraid of the future prevent us from saving our democracy now, or something to that effect,
mm-hmm.
which is very along the lines of Donald Trump saying, what did he say? No man who saves his country can violate a law, so on and so forth.
I think quoting from Napoleon. Yeah, I think it's interesting you bring up the Roosevelts. Do you want to do Teddy or
let's do
Franklin?
FDR to start. To what degree is it a fair assessment to say that FDR governed with sweeping executive, monarchical's too charged of a word, but like centralized, power?
I don't think it's fair to say that he governed like a monarch. And the reason for that is, a lot of the policies that he was implementing required Congress, and where he had insane majorities in the Congress to pass his agenda. So there's already the imprimatur of congressional action, right? Like what is he passing? He's passing the Social Security Act. He's passing the National Labor Relations Board. He's passing, sweeping policies through Congress to implement greater reform on everything from, banking to social insurance. So these are all things done with Congress, passed through Congress, with large majorities. And so that already stands him apart from how Trump is acting. Yes, did FDR have executive policies? He did. But think like some of these key precedents that came down that dispute the unitary executive theory. The one that I'm referencing right now is Humphrey's executor. That's a case in which an FTC commissioner was trying to go against FDR. This was Humphrey. Humphrey died. That's why it's Humphrey's executor, and he was suing. But this was a case in which the Supreme Court recognized that Congress is able to put agencies of certain multi-member commissions, independent agencies that are free from or have at least some amount of protection from removal by the president. So a lot of the limitations on executive power, and even frankly on legislative power, come during the Roosevelt administration. He does listen to them. Now, it is the case that there was a switch in time that saved the nine. This is the line that's often repeated about how the court packing happened and there was potentially like a threat, unspoken threat, that he was going to pack the courts, and then the courts changed their view on a couple of the policies.
It was very clearly spoken to the American people on these fireside chats.
I mean,
and he straight up lied too. He was like, for every judge that's over the age of 70, we're going to add a new judge. And he said, well, the reason for this is because 70 is the classic retirement age agreed upon by all these things. It was like, no, it was because that's exactly how many judges he needed to pack it so that they could stop striking down all of this.
All I'm trying to say is that it's not, I wouldn't call it an exact quid pro quo. But yeah, there certainly is a threat from the Roosevelt administration towards the courts, because the courts were striking down a lot of these New Deal era policies. But there have been a lot of chief executives that had problems with the courts. Obama had his issues with the courts. Biden had his issues with the courts. And
Trump.
Trump himself as well. But although Trump is in the realm of actually defying orders, and I think doing bad faith litigation in a way that's remarkable. So I always, I'm a fucking lib, and so I'm going to do this Trump exceptionalism argument or whatever. So and even in the first set of courts under John Marshall, there was a lot of consternation in the courts as well. So I don't think that mere threats of court packing, that kind of stuff, or messing with the courts in other ways, limiting their jurisdiction, which Trump is doing through his legal arguments in some cases, saying like, you don't have the right to hear this. I don't think that's enough to call you fascistic by itself. And that's not the best case of FDR being a tyrant, especially because he didn't do it.
My understanding is FDR never outright rejected or went around the rulings of the Supreme Court, but he absolutely rejected and ignored injunctions from the appellate courts and the lower courts, which I believe Trump, that describes Trump, right? Has Trump explicitly...
I would say he violated the Kilmar... I would say he violated... Yeah. So when the Supreme Court said to facilitate the return of Kilmar Berger Garcia, they sat on their ass and didn't do so and delayed for months and months. And I don't take that, the whole time in which they're not facilitating his return, I see them to be in violation of what the Supreme Court said. And so, yeah, at some point they brought him back, but that court order didn't say wait for 3 months or 2 months and then charge him with a crime and bring him back. It said facilitate his return. And for months, Trump was basically saying I didn't have to do that. And we actually won at the Supreme Court. And during that entire interim, I think that he was in violation of, now it's not a direct order from the Supreme Court. It's the Supreme Court affirming an order from the lower court. But that procedural posture hardly matters in my opinion. But I'm not sure which court order you're referencing with respect to FDR. Maybe there's some injunction that I'm not aware of. But in general, FDR, why was he not, why was he limiting himself in terms of his conduct towards the Allies in World War II? I mean, he was listening to the Neutrality Act as best, he got around it in many cases, and they adjusted the laws at some point. But in general, I think that it's a little bit much to say that he was acting like a dictator. He had a Congress that was in support of him, a new coalition, and a great deal of power, no doubt. And it was happening at a time in which there was unprecedented economic turmoil in the country, and a more unified sense of purpose in the country as well. So yeah, I think that the country was in a different mood. It was a transition period, and there was overwhelming support for what Roosevelt was doing from the people, and they rewarded him with 4 presidential victories.
Sure. I guess the argument is that in terms of solving the problem or solving a problem, it's best to have an executive with strong centralized power. And then the arguments around it are, well, but he had a mandate. There was all these, significant crises that justified it. Yeah, I think that makes sense. But well, I suppose, how do I phrase this? Because if the idea is like, well, it's okay to govern, okay, yeah, like a dictator and like a monarch and like a CEO, these are all just, words don't mean anything nowadays, if you may have noticed. But if the argument is like, well, if the crisis is sufficient enough, it's okay to basically ignore courts and, and threaten the Supreme Court. Like, the ends justify the means, essentially, which is sort of the opposite of the underlying principle of democracy of like, no, it is the means. The means are the thing that are sacred, right? It is the checks and balances that must be protected in and of themselves. Otherwise, you have a dictator.
When I say there was a different feeling and sentiment in the country, I just mean in the sense of the reason why we're passing on this sweeping stuff that is creating more bureaucracy, it's creating more direct presidential action, is because of the nature of what was in front of the country. Not to say that it therefore is impossible for it to be dictatorial or whatever, or monarchical. Just that the nature of the struggles that Americans were facing, the Great Depression, eventually the war, these were struggles that were against Americans as Americans, and it was a collective struggle. And in that sense, the solutions were unitary and nationwide.
Is it true that, or what is your assessment of the claim that the New Deal, many of the New Deal programs, absolutely violated the enumerated powers clause? Because it seems like there's no. I mean, the enumerated powers clause very clearly says anything that's not explicitly delegated to the federal government is to be reserved to the states, right? That's the enumerated powers clause, right?
You're talking about the 10th Amendment.
What is that colloquially known as?
Yeah,
reserved powers clause.
Well, there's a principle known as of the enumeration of powers, and basically the federal government is a government of limited powers. And the 10th Amendment states that all powers not hereby delegated to the federal government are reserved for the states or the people, respectively. And so that is an amendment that many people think is redundant, and I think it is too. That is, like, the mere fact that we're listing out all of these powers by Congress implies that they don't have a general police power, unlike the states, right, where there's general congressional legislative authority in the states. The fact that we have to list out all of the different powers that Congress has is by implication, suggesting that anything that's not delegated is not contained. Like, why would we go through all the work of listing out when and how Congress can legislate if they could legislate on all matters within their domain? We don't, for example, do that with the executive power. The executive power doesn't list out. There are some specifics, but it's much more general, much broader in the sense that we're not going through, this is everything the president can do. But with Congress, it kind of is. And so it implies, in my opinion, that the federal government, and especially Congress, is a government of limited powers. And the 10th Amendment applies that to... No, I'm just noticing the difference there, that the notion of implied powers and the notion of a government of general authority, that's not present in the federal government, and especially with respect to Congress, that there are limits for sure in terms of... Now, they also have the broadest set of things that they can do with respect to the other branches, and they in part define the scope of what the other branches can do. Congress defines the scope of what the executive branch even does, and so they have a lot of control there. And in terms of the courts, they can make exceptions to the court's appellate jurisdiction, and they can even create or destroy lower federal courts as they wish. And so the Congress here is the legislative branch of the government, which, in contrast to the state legislative branches, is much more tailored. and it's not just a government of general jurisdiction, like, for example, the House of Commons in the UK or any state, legislative branch. But I agree with that principle. You're basically suggesting that during the FDR administration, those limits have been overstepped, and I'm asking you to give an example.
That's a good question. I should know that. I mean, surely there are many people who would say that there are respected scholars, right, that would say that he violated his constitutional, or violated the Constitution with the creation of the
that Congress did as well, because remember, these are potentially acts of Congress that would be themselves unconstitutional because they don't have a source of legislative authority in Article 1.
Right.
So folks, to step back a little bit, what PF Jung is talking, or Paul is talking about here, is that Article 1 in Section 8 and in other sections lists out all the things Congress can do. Congress can provide for the general defense and welfare, right? Congress can raise armies for 2 years at a time. Congress can do this, this, and that. And what he's proposing is, well, it seems that some scholars are suggesting that during the New Deal, the government became a lot more of a general government doing whatever they wanted, as opposed to really limiting themselves to the express purposes or the express powers of Congress. And I say, well, what's an example of that? But any example that you're going to provide, it should be acknowledged that this is not the president acting by himself. He's, enacting or he's enforcing some act of Congress that he had help in bringing about this new regime by the legislative branch. And so that's one way I would distinguish what Trump is doing, where he's not doing that. But yeah, the case that a lot of scholars will cite to with some consternation is a Wickard v. Filburn case. And that's like a case in which the government is like fining some guy because he grew a bunch of wheat for himself to eat. And people are like, that's ridiculous. How can the government regulate how much you're growing some wheat in your own home for your own consumption or whatever? You're not selling this wheat in interstate commerce, because there's an interstate commerce clause of Article 1, which gives Congress the power to regulate interstate commerce. And so what people say, what these legal scholars say, is it's absolutely insane that Congress or the president would have the authority to punish someone for growing wheat just for themselves in their own farm for their own consumption. So that's maybe where does that come from? The case is called Wickard v. Filburn, and I would just respond that, listen, interstate commerce, that means a lot of things, and it grows the more we're interconnected as a society. Obviously, the amount of regulation is going to grow. And you imagine if in a time of in a time of crisis, it could be the case that any one farmer's personal growth of wheat isn't going to affect the prices across the land. But if every single farmer, or if every single person behaved like Farmer Filburn or whatever, or Wickard, I forget which the farmer was, it would have a substantial effect on the price of interstate commerce. And so, is it too much? Is it too far? I'm not sure. But it doesn't really seem like a dictatorial power. That seems like an issue of whether or not Congress is being faithful to the Constitution in conjunction with the president, and whether the courts are doing the right job in approving it. But it is going through that system of ours, and it's not just the president deciding to do it. I just monologued at you, but does that make sense? So
No. This is all. I'm here to learn. Let's see. What is a couple ways we could do it?
Even if you, all I want to say is on that, even if you agree Wickard v. Filburn went too far, it's not a dictator versus Democrat issue.
Right.
Because Congress went too far, right? And the courts approved it, right? The court said this is okay. And that, I think, is the fundamental difference here. You can take a different view of the Commerce Clause, but it doesn't, I think, affect how one calculates the dictator question.
Okay, let's talk about fascism and the accusations of fascism. Because I'm doing a video called Nobody Loves Fascism More Than I Do, in classic me titling my videos. Fashion. What does fascist mean, Pisco? Define fascist.
So I see fascism as an ideology, a political ideology, first and foremost. So it's a set of political ideas that, and there's an archetype here, where the archetype is Mussolini's fascist state. And just like any category, it's levels of proximity, degrees of proximity close to that archetype being Mussolini's fascist state. And those, it's a cluster concept, and those clusters include ultranationalism, high degrees of ultranationalism, high degrees of reactionary right-wing political ideology, authoritarianism. So this is the notion that there are no checks on the leader's power, mythology, and mythologizing. So basically, either a racial historical myth-making. In the case of the Nazis, it's this Aryan racial hierarchy. In the case of Mussolini, maybe Rome, right? This glorious past to go back to, where conspiracy is at the center of that political ideology as well. And ultimately, the exercise of military power domestically and abroad. So it's a political ideology containing those clusters with those various archetypes that I described. And that, I think, is the best way to put it.
What percent of people or instances of people getting called fascist nowadays have that definition in mind, you think?
I'm not sure.
If you had to hazard a guess based on your...
I truly don't know. I don't have a good sense of that kind of polling.
Okay, tell me, is the overwhelming majority of people getting... Like, was Charlie Kirk a fascist?
I believe he was.
You do believe Charlie Kirk was a fascist?
I do.
Can you be a fascist and a good person?
That's a complicated question. I think the answer is
we live in complicated
yes.
times, Pisco.
So, like, Oskar Schindler was a Nazi. And I take whether you're a good person to be some sort of composite of all the things you have done in the past. And so I think it's possible for there to be good fascists, but it's hard.
Do you have roughly the same opinion on fascism as you do communism?
What do you mean by that?
Do you regard both as bad?
Yes.
Interesting. All right, so Charlie Kirk's a fascist. Interesting. I guess this is part of my issue. Part of my issue is the term gets thrown around so much, and it describes, I don't know, 40% of the country, let's say, because that's probably the number of people that agree with Charlie Kirk, to a significant enough extent that he would be called a fascist. What particularly what has Charlie Kirk said that would make him be a fascist, you think?
I think the key indicators to me are, one, his support for authoritarian government. He tried to overturn a free and fair election. He supported the actions of Trump, who I think operates as a fascist. So therefore, he's providing ideological support of and devotion to a leader who I take to be fascist, given his policies and given what he wants to see. I think that he embodies a lot of the archetypes that I've described, including ultra-conservatism, ultra-nationalism, believing in some of this, conspiratorial myth-making that I talked about. And yeah, so I think that he aligns closely, not perfectly, no one's going to be perfect, with the kind of archetype that I've described. And,
I guess
can I push you a little bit? So my question for you is: do you agree that fascism is bad and communism is bad?
well, not if it.
Is communism bad? Yes or no?
Well, hold on. If we're defining if Charlie Kirk is a fascist, then fascism is clearly not as bad as I would have thought.
Well, I guess I'll just ask the question
Fascism,
clean.
like,
I'll ask the question clean. Is communism bad?
yes, by and large, I would say.
Is fascism bad?
Yes, by and large.
Okay, but you're saying
But I strongly agree with, well, but hold on, depend, because again, so like, is Bernie Sanders a communist?
I don't think so.
Okay, but if someone said, I wonder if Ben Shapiro would say if Bernie Sanders is a communist. Probably. He's probably said something like that, right? We don't know. But
I'm not sure.
Sure. If I was talking to a conservative commentator and he said Bernie Sanders is an example of a communist, what about, hold on, Zoran Mamdani, is he a communist?
Not what I take to be communist. No.
Okay, I know for a fact there's people who call Zoran a communist.
There are people who, but I want to separate if there are people who call him that and whether I think they are. And so when you ask me, is communism bad? I have a notion of communism in my head, and I'm applying that. It's not necessarily.
Yeah, so this is what I would precisely point to as the issue, is people get called fascist or communists across the board by different people, and all these words mean different things. And so...
Did how I describe fascism ring true to you or not?
Did it ring true to me?
Or do you agree?
We can pick it apart. So,
is that what you understand a fascist to be, or something approaching that?
Is Adolf Hitler would be a fascist, obviously.
Yeah.
The Nazis would be fascist ideology.
Yes. Is there a reason you didn't want to answer my question?
Kirk?
So I asked you a question about my definition I provided, which was, do you think that my definition aligns with what you take a fascist to be?
Hold
we
on.
can go through examples if you want, but I'm just curious. Is there a reason?
We're in lawyer mode here. Pisco, we're just talking.
I know, but I'm curious if there's a reason you didn't answer it.
What was the question? Is your description of fascism ring true?
Yeah. Do you think that tracks your meaning of it?
I'm not sure. I don't know. Because if we're going to use the same word to describe the political ideology of Hitler as Charlie Kirk, it makes the word so vague or it broadens the definition of the word so far beyond, at least how I think many people see it. That it makes it difficult to like.
I'm not sure if I track that, because would you agree that Kirk was an anti-communist?
Yes.
And surely you agree that Hitler was an anti-communist?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, does that broaden the term so much that we can't have an understanding of the term anti-communist just because two people who are very different?
Anti-communists, to define yourself in opposition of something is much different than defining yourself as a single thing.
I'm just saying the mere fact that Charlie Kirk and Hitler are very different, and I agree, they're very different, doesn't mean that they're not both fascists, just any more than it means that they're not both anti-communist.
Yeah, but the reason that people throw the words fascist around is because fascist means, like, if I were to say someone like Mehdi Hassan, like the Jubilee thing, you saw that, right? The Mehdi Hassan Jubilee, right? The whole point was like, Mehdi Hassan said, well, actually, the guy self-identified as a fascist, but Mehdi Hassan was like saying, you could say I'm a fascist. The implication there, and I think it's one that most people share, is that fascist by definition equals bad. Like bad, immoral thing we should fight against. And if like, I would say Nazi for sure is that description. I'm assuming you wouldn't call Charlie Kirk a Nazi.
No, I wouldn't. But you're talking about like why people would use a term, right? Like why someone might use a term. Does that bear on like what you think the term means?
That's the only words ultimately mean what people think they mean. That's the only thing.
I understand. I agree that use is meaning, but like, is the reason why one would use a word, is that in your mind defining the scope of what that word means to you? Because I hear this a lot.
Yes,
like
100%.
Okay, so
because words mean what they mean. So if someone calls someone else a Nazi, there's an intent. There's like, fuck this guy. This guy's a bad person. We need to fight against them. The word fascism is basically used interchangeably with Nazi in the popular discourse. Would you agree with that?
I don't think that it's used interchangeably, but I think it's often
Really?
used in conjunction, but I don't think that they're used interchangeably.
I think the average person, if someone is like, this person's a Nazi, the signal that they are receiving is essentially the same as is if someone says this person's a Nazi.
And the same with
You're
the term
not-
racist.
Yeah.
But you would never
Generally.
say, well, racist is the same as fascist and Nazi because they all are conjoined together in this list of explicatives. You know, like I don't take just because the word is being used maybe to flatten conversation or being used as a pejorative. Like I think the word still has a meaning,
Sure.
and that
You
word
could say dummy. Yeah, you could say asshole. Like,
right. So
was Hitler an asshole? Like, yes, true.
so I want to be
yes, I
very
agree.
specific on this like little point that I'm
Okay,
making.
go
So
ahead.
this
Sure,
little
sure,
point
sure.
I'm making is why someone might invoke a word doesn't necessarily dictate its use as in the sense of like how it's understood. So I might be calling you a fascist for negative reasons or because I'm bad faith or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the term fascist is like ought to be defined some other way or ought to be narrowed beyond its like technical meaning or whatever it is that you want to talk about. I think that in order to show that Kirk is or is not a fascist, it should start and end first with a semantic analysis of what you take fascist to mean and seeing if it applies to Charlie Kirk. But it seems like what we're doing here is having some theory of words that is like, well, the word fascism shouldn't include Charlie Kirk because if it did include Charlie Kirk, it would be too broad. And I just like, you could have that kind of prescriptive view about what words should mean. I just don't share that intuition.
That's fair. That's why we're discussing this. My concern, I was thinking about what the thesis for the video would be of like, why do I even care about this, talking about like fascism and all that? It's such a internet fraught thing. And the reason is because we're at a point now where terms like fascism are thrown around so loosely and so often by people. I mean, the majority of people who are participating in the political discourse probably don't even know who Giovanni Gentile is. They probably barely know who Mussolini is. I mean, they know who Mussolini is, but they don't, know any of the history of fascism or whatever. And so, like, the problem is, I agree, and in some sense, I'm more interested in the. Let's talk about fascism as like the Italian concept, for example, how it differed from the Nazi concept, because it's actually kind of insane based on some of the research I've done. The degree to which the Italian fascism just straight up was at 100% odds with the Nazi biological racism, they called it, and there were many Italian fascist Jews.
Although over time, Mussolini borrowed from Hitler, and
Of course, he got
started
little
to
broed by
merge.
Hitler.
Yeah.
Yes,
And then he started to implement Nuremberg-style laws and kicking out Jews. I think he sent a bunch of Jews to camps as well. So I agree with you that at its base, go for it.
Do you know who TK History is?
No, I don't know who that is.
He's a YouTube channel. He's like a neoliberal cuck, you could say. But he does like historical analysis of fascism and Hitler and all that. And I watched one of his videos, and he claimed that the number, I think that like the number of Jews that were killed in Italy or even handed over were basically zero, and that the Italians actually brought a lot of Jews over, even when they were allied with Hitler. That's fact check. We can fact check.
Yeah, we can fact check.
But my point is, what's indisputable is like the Giovanni Gentile strain of fascism explicitly rejects racism. Like Benito Mussolini. Have you seen the JREG video, post-racial fascism?
Tell me about it.
There's a quote from Benito Mussolini that, if you didn't know it was from Mussolini, you'd think was from Martin Luther King. I say semi-ironically, where it's like he says race is a complete fiction. Race has nothing to do with the body of the nation, which is obviously at direct odds with the Nazi biological racism. And of course, it historically doesn't change the fact that fucking Mussolini just joined the Nazis. And but like this is my issue of like, okay, well, hold on. If we're going to discuss the ideology of fascism, well, are we going to use the Giovanni Gentile sort of ideological strain of thought, or are we going to use the Nazi one, or are we going to call Charlie Kirk this and all that? It's like there is no consensus on it, and that's a problem, and B, I guess I'm interested because it's so like you asked about communism. It's like yeah, communism, as I understand it, and if we're going to use it in the broadest sense, bad form of government, absurd. However, I agree with a lot of what many people who call themselves communists, or at least don't care about the label of communist, say. Like wealth inequality is a major problem. It's sort of the basis of communism. And like, okay, talking about the third position is the Giovanni Gentile fascists or whatever. It's like, I agree a lot with people who say like, yeah, we should have a strong national identity. That I do think more that, the idea of like a nation of individuals and having our conceptions of liberty and freedom be that of negative freedom rather than positive freedom, I don't think that's necessarily a good model. I do think it's good to have to instead of saying, well, like America is a country of individuals where everyone can pursue their own ends and freedoms. It's like, no, America is one nation with a common destiny. And that is more in the mythological underlying narrative of people who, fascistic in the same way that like, I really think wealth inequality is a real problem that we need to take like strong action to address. Well, that's what communists would say. So it's like, I agree with, depending on how you define fascists and communists, a lot of these people. But the problem is like, well, Hitler's and the Nazis are called fat. And it's like that.
We can just clarify our terms, right? Like, so I hear a lot of what you're saying, and I agree with a lot of it. So to the extent that like there are things from various different ideologies that you can agree with, like there are some aspects maybe of the way that communists look at history that you might find it's informative. There are some aspects of public work projects that you might find even like Nazis had a good idea on public work projects, or that communists had great ideas when it came to this or that. So I agree that just incorporating some like good ideas from otherwise bad ideologies doesn't make you the thing itself. And I agree that like there are different strains of thought about what these terms mean, different proffered definitions, but you and I, we can just clarify what we mean by the term. And it seems like there's a desire on your part to get to like the normative, like what fascism should mean. But first, I think we should like talk about what fascism you take to mean, whether or not it should be used one way or the other. Like, what do you understand fascism to be, and does Charlie Kirk fit the bill? What you'll often hear, I think, from certain people who fight on the is Trump a fascist, is they'll say, well, has Trump instituted the Holocaust? Well, has Trump totally ended democracy yet? Or has Trump made any effort to throw people into camps, at least, or denaturalize people? It's funny because now he is trying to do denaturalization, which was something that the Nazis did. But like, they'll try to have this threshold of action that until Trump does a World War II style event, until Trump actually puts Jews in ovens, he's not a fascist. And that is just collapsing on itself. I'm assuming that you don't take one of those preposterous views. And so we can just work with whatever your notion of fascism is. And if the conclusion on your notion of what fascism is that Charlie Kirk is a fascist, then like, I'm sorry, that's just your meaning of the term fascist would include Charlie Kirk, but like, let's work with it. Let's see. So what do you
hold on. Well, because the reason I've come here is because my primary concern is with how most people use the term, right? We're in a meme war. We're in an ideological civil war, and it is made up of memes being spread around and people arguing over terms. And so the reason I am interested in this topic at all is precisely because I'm trying to gauge and understand and predict like how the language and the discourse is going to evolve, and what the implications that will have for certain ideologies gaining influence over others. Like, for example, the far right, new right, Nick Fuentes type, Curtis Yarvin, even though there's differences there and all that. Like, I guess my working theory is that because fascism is being used in a very loose way.
Wait,
speaking, not by specific individuals, but on the whole.
I just want to say, like, there's one conversation of, is it being used in a loose way? That's a claim, right? And until, like, in order to make that claim,
I'm just taking that for granted. I don't even want to argue with that about you, because I'm observing the discourse
for the audience. But understand, in order to make the claim that fascism, the word, is being used in a loose way, you would have to have a self-standing notion of fascism by which to compare and say, well, this is not in a line
wrong.
with the.
I disagree.
How could you? How could you
Object.
say that?
I object.
Yeah.
I could just come up with I could just make up a word right now. Blork.
Blork.
And if Blork was used to describe such a broad array of things that had not enough commonality, then I wouldn't need to have a definition for the word Blork. I could just say the word Blork it doesn't signify anything of importance.
So when you're saying, okay, so what about the term human? The term human can be applied to every human. Is that a term that is being used too loosely?
No, because dogs are not human. Humans very clearly defined by things that
dogs are not fascists. Insects are not fascist. Rocks are not fascist. So it's not being used too loosely.
Fascist?
Yeah, dogs aren't fascist. So do you understand what I'm saying? Like, in order to say something
German shepherds are a little
so loosely is a referential word. Loosely is with respect to something, right? It's loose with respect to its proper meaning. It's loose with respect to. I
mean, used in a way that is not productive or not useful.
That's what I mean. I think that's the conversation that you're interested in. The conversation that you're interested in having, I don't think is Charlie Kirk a fascist. It's regardless of whether or not, if Charlie Kirk is a fascist, should we call him that and should we use the term fascist, which is like a normative conversation as opposed to like a descriptive one, which is given a set meaning, is he this? So that's what I'm seeing as your interest has to do with like, what are the effects of calling these people fascists, regardless of whether the term, as properly understood, applies to them.
No, because saying regardless of whether or not the term, I'm questioning the idea that the term even has, because if we say, is it fascist to subjugate people on the basis of race?
Not by itself, right?
Yeah, but people would point that to, like you said, it's a cluster phenomenon, right? So, it's like a DSM thing, or if you check 5 out of 7 or whatever. Which, I mean, I would argue that's all concepts. That's like a Wittgenstein.
I totally would agree with that it's all concepts. But like, I want to narrow the thing right there. Like, it seems that you are uninterested in discussing whether or not he is or is not a fascist.
All right, hold on. What is your motivation in this? What are you interested in discussing?
Well, I just was here to answer your questions about executive theory and I thought they were very interesting questions and very interesting things you brought up.
Right.
So I'm just doing that.
I know this feels very lawyerly because normally my motivations are I suppose. Hold on. I guess I'll be clear.
Yeah.
When it's like, is Charlie Kirk a fascist? It's like whether or not Charlie Kirk is a fascist depends on whether or not Hitler is a fascist. And generally, it's like I don't like. There is a practical thing of like, I'm not going to use the same word to describe Hitler as Charlie Kirk. Now you would point out, like, well, what about like race? We could just say like racist or mean, even like mean.
Yeah.
Like, was Charlie Kirk mean? It's like, yeah. Was Hitler mean? It's like, yeah, but at a certain point, using the same word like that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
because think about this, right? Point. If you mean interpersonally mean, by all accounts, Charlie Kirk was nice as hell. That's what TYT says.
But he was mean to.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean. Like, if it matters what you mean, like, Adolf Hitler, he was someone who, on occasion, was very soft-spoken and apparently really loved his dog. Right? Was obsessed with his dog. So it depends what you mean by nice or mean in that sense. Like, it really, really does matter. Now, you could take the view is, I don't want to say anything of Hitler that's true of Charlie Kirk. And some people take the view that Charlie Kirk, for example, is racist. I don't want to
say of Hitler anything that's true of Charles. Okay.
Some people say that Charlie Kirk is racist, right? I'm not saying that I said he's probably racist, but I put that aside.
I think everyone's probably racist.
I don't think, and maybe that's true. I don't think that he's racist in the way that Hitler's racist. But or you could say something like this, like, you could make, I think, a strong argument that there are some black nationalists who are racist as fuck, or that Malcolm X said things that were super, super racist. But do I think that they're racist in the same way as Hitler, or racist in the same way as your average Southern Democrat in, the KKK era? Probably not. So there can be a great deal of additional conversation to clarify what we mean by terms. And maybe you're frustrated that that's not happening when people just throw around the label fascist.
Well, yeah, that's part of it. But even like we were pointing about racist, it's like that's precisely why I think the term racist has lost all its calling someone a racist means absolutely nothing nowadays.
But you can just ask
Because
people
the
what
term
they
has been
mean by
used.
the term, right? So like, if you're in a conversation with someone and you say like, "Hey, what do you when you call Charlie Kirk a racist? What do you actually mean by
Wait, hold
that?"
on. Let me. You know who Alex O'Connor is?
Yeah.
I have to look into it more, but he puts forward a theory of knowledge called emotivism. Or maybe it's a
That's his. I think.
philosophy.
Yeah, I think that's his moral outlook.
moral philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Where like, boo. What is this thing? It's like if you don't like Hitler, you say like boo Hitler. It's like, is boo Hitler a true statement? It's like, no, it's an expression of a sentiment. And it's true that you might feel that way, but like you can't logically parse boo Hitler because it's an expression of emotion.
You're saying that he's taking the view that moral propositions are not truth apt.
Correct. And so I subscribe to the degree that I understand that aligns with my sort of pragmatist view of language and morality. And so that's why I have an issue with it's just like when people say someone's a fascist, they don't. The people who are calling Charlie Kirk a fascist, besides not you, the majority of the people, the majority of the discourse that is going on amongst the normies or the moderately politically engaged people, they are not calling people fascist because they meet a set of criteria. They literally mean fascist equals enemy, fascist equals bad person. It's more of an emotivist expression. I believe, and I'm saying I'm taking this is an assumption. I don't want to argue about this. I suppose
Sure.
we could if you disagree, but like I'm just taking that based on my observation of that is how the word is being used. And so I agree that we do need to have a discussion about like, okay, the definitions of fascism and the Giovanni Gentile versus the Nazi biological fascism and all that stuff, or biological racism and all that. And it's just like, that's what I'm generally interested in, and I'm in lawyer mode now, defending myself. Even though I don't even know what I'm arguing. I'm telling you.
Yeah, let's take a step back.
So we can talk about Charlie Kirk. We can
yeah.
talk about Charlie Kirk.
Well, let's take a step back. So I kind of view the conversation in different ways, right? Like I'm personally interested.
I noticed that. It's like Richard Dawkins and Jordan Peterson talking.
Sure, yeah. I kind of see there's a conversation about like what is fascism? Is it being misapplied by the left or by Democrats or by this or that?
Sure.
That is a conversation that fundamentally relies on what the meaning of the term fascism is and how people mean it when they use it. That's number one. Like, so the conversation about is the label being misapplied fundamentally relies on there being some cashing out of the meaning of the term. So that's what I just said about the emotivism thing. I don't agree with that. With the meaning of
There's
word,
no meaning.
So words have meaning, right? You understand words to, in order for us to even be intelligible, right? You have to understand the words I'm saying. And whether you're a emotivist or not, I understand emotivism to be related to moral propositions, not necessarily the meaning of a word.
Right. Well,
Right.
but meaning is what we define meaning is like meaning is the degree to which it has salience to one's behavior and emotion. So if I say boo Charlie Kirk, the meaning is that that person doesn't like Charlie Kirk. If someone says Charlie Kirk is a fascist,
then they're being correct,
opinion,
right? So if you take,
and I would say Charlie Kirk is a fascist is a similar.
Okay,
for many
but
people, that's
then
how they're using it.
If you're understanding Charlie Kirk is a fascist to mean boo Charlie Kirk, or I don't like Charlie Kirk, then to the degree that it's making any statement, it's something to the effect of I disapprove of Charlie Kirk. That probably accurately reflects their views, their subjective views. In which case, they're not saying anything wrong, right? So,
but my point is, it has absolutely nothing. It almost always has absolutely nothing to do with the degree to which Charlie Kirk exemplifies the Giovanni Gentile, like ideological notion.
Well, that's
of
a kid, but that's this kind of conversation that you're not as much interested in. What I'm saying is like the meaning of the term fascism, that's a conversation we can have, and then we can get into, well, is it aligning with the historical, technical, or emotivist meaning of the term fascism as you understand it? That's the meaning conversation. Separately from that, I kind of view a potential normative conversation, which is something like, well, we don't care what the term is, we just should just stop using it in this context. But then you're going to have to make the case, which I think a lot of people don't like to make, that we shouldn't call people what they are. Like, we shouldn't use terms as they're understood, as as applied to individuals. And oftentimes people will say something like, well, if you're a woman, I'm going to call you a woman. I don't care if you want to be called a man. And in the context of the trans conversation. And so we're running up against, if you take the view that people should stop calling Charlie, and we have that normative conversation, then you're running up against, I think...
not necessarily saying they should stop calling him that, because it's a helpful marker for me to identify what they believe.
Who? You mean the people who are calling him fascist?
Yeah.
So what are you interested in? Are you interested in the descriptive, like, what is fascism? What's the meaning? Is it being misapplied? Or are you in conversation and interested in, like, the normative question of, like, should he be called this? Shouldn't he be?
Again, when I was sitting out writing, like, what am I going to write for this video? I was like, why am I interested in this? Again, my thing is I see people getting called fascists all the time, but then I compare it to, like, the Giovanni Gentile. There's a lot, and like I said, there's a lot that people who would be described as fascists, and like the Giovanni Gentile fascists, believe that I would agree with. Exactly the same way that there's a lot of communists and Marxists and stuff that they say that I would believe. And I guess maybe to be more important, or more drill it down more, it's not just like I agree, like, Hitler loved dogs. It's like, so I agree with Hitler on some things. It's like, no. What I talked about earlier about the fundamental idea of, like, liberalism as a collection of individuals all pursuing their own ends, liberty being the highest value. It's like that's like the fundamental, arguably like the fundamental basis of the United States and kind of liberal ideology. And I'm saying I sympathize more with again, you can call it as soon as I say I sympathize more with the fascist description of this, it's like the Hitler loves dog thing. It's like you can be someone who's not a fascist and agree that actually the conception of America we should have is not one of a bunch of individuals doing their own thing that are hyper-atomized and all that.
I'm not sure you can say that unless you have a notion of what I'm not sure you can say that unless you have a notion of what fascism is. You just said you can be a fascist if X, Y, Z, or you cannot be a fascist if X, Y, Z. But in order to even say that statement, you'd have to have some notion of fascism that you're using, right? So
okay, let's go with the Giovanni Gentile.
Okay, so describe
strain of fascism.
Describe that strain to me in a way that you. So this is the strain that you. When you use the term fascism, is that what you're saying? I think you're hesitant because I think that it's possible.
Because I know how people. Because see, it's like saying, it's like if I. Okay, words have multiple meanings. So if I say the word faggot.
Yeah.
That word has different meaning. Now you can say, it's a bundle of sticks and twigs. It's like, well, you should go around and tell people, go like, just start using a term.
Just be clear about what you mean, right?
Like, know how it.
So you could say that the word is so distasteful, it's like a slur that I don't want to use.
Yes, correct. Because hold on, when people think of fascists, it's Adolf Hitler, right?
Yeah.
So like. Okay, let's say. Well, we're going to use the Giovanni Gentile, which again I haven't even looked. Part of the research I have to do is dig into this.
Yeah.
I have a few books, doing with some comparative fascism that I need to read. But I do know for a fact that there are like the post-racial fascism idea is there. It's like I agree with that aspect of fascism, that race is irrelevant to the the destiny of it. Like a nation can be a nation of many races. Like I agree with that. I like that.
You're just telling me things about aspects that you agree with, but ultimately,
right, that's my point. I guess what's the point of even describing it?
You just said basically what I heard you say is the word is like the word the F slur for gay people, and I don't even want to legitimize its usage by squaring down and centralizing a meaning that I am using. That I prefer to keep it ambiguous because I just don't want to legitimize what the word is. And you could take that view, but I think it's a kind of proprietary view. Not even conservatives take this view. Like,
what is a proprietary view mean?
That the word fascism is alike those racial slurs that, in their own nature, are kind of like verbal utterances that should be like in and of themselves condemned. You understand what I'm saying? So there are some words
that should be condemned.
So the utterance themselves, right, like the word usage itself, should be curtailed because of its harmful effects.
I'm not saying it should be curtailed.
That's what I'm saying. Is like
I'm pointing out that that's how people are using the term.
Wait,
now hold on. Okay, hold on, because all right, we're getting drilled down here, and again, this is very good lawyerly stuff. This is not mine. This is not
sure.
Maybe we can move to a broader philosophical discussion of like why even care about this. Yeah. Okay. So let's put the fascism aside for a moment, or we'll go by the individual claims or whatnot. At the basis of it, the idea that America is one nation with a common destiny rather than a collection of individuals. What do you think of that? And I don't have like a hardcore definition. You know, I'm asking you like
with a common destiny. It depends how loosely that destiny can be understood, but in general, I don't have a problem with that, and I'm sure there's some looseness. If the destiny is something approaching freedom and prosperity, then
how about
yes.
Positive freedom versus negative freedom? You're familiar with that distinction?
Yeah.
I see. I lean more strongly to the positive freedom dimension. I think negative freedom.
Okay, we differ on that. Where I think I would more stress negative freedoms. But,
yeah, I think. Okay,
but like, what are we talking about now? Like, it seems like now that there's like this central premise that there's some aversion. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Maybe it's the right thing to be averse to it because, you know, there are individuals potentially who could take words that we use and out of context or in context and use them as a justification for something. But tell me if I'm wrong, that I'm sensing some trepidation about clearly demarcating fascism or adjacent terms and getting a proper understanding of their scope. Because if I were to do that, I think that there are uncomfortable entailments that follow.
Yeah, and you're not. It's not possible to do that.
What do you mean it's not possible?
Okay,
what do you mean by it's not possible? It's not possible to define a word or understand its meaning?
We're having it. I sense you're in lawyer mode right now.
I'm not in lawyer mode. I'm really trying to have this conversation.
Because we just talked about this.
No, but we can stop the conversation about fascism and move on and be like, I don't want to talk about it.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay.
We're getting to the broader. We're getting to the liberal.
Okay.
That's what I'm asking. The positive freedom versus negative freedom thing. So you're against negative freedom, or you're against positive freedom?
No, I think that there's.
Or you're against the conception of liberty as positive freedom.
My view of like, I don't really have a properly scoped out normative ethical frame or whatever. But in general, my intuition is that I care much more about negative freedoms and freedoms from oppression from the government than I do about the government having some obligation to provide for you. That said, I'm like a liberal in the American sense, and so I'm generally in favor of more positive freedoms in the government. For example, having some kind of Medicare for all or universal healthcare system. But I just value the negative freedoms much, much more. Thank you for the super chats.
Do you think that homeless people who are on the street, strung out on heroin, how should we deal with those people?
Depends. In general, I think that certain individuals who are dangerous to themselves and to their communities.
Not.
You mean homeless people in general? In general, I think that people have a right to be free from government intrusion, and so merely being homeless, I think, is not a crime in and of itself and can't be under our system.
You don't have to dox yourself, but what city do you live in?
New York City.
Okay, how bad is the homeless problem there?
It's bad.
Okay, I live in Austin. It's very bad. Like, I walk down the street and on the bench, just doing heroin. Like, no even attempt to cover it up. Strung out, just all like that, and that's all over. Mm-hmm. People will just go down an alley and just take their pants down and piss and shit and stuff down right on the alley. Those people are free from government interference.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that those people are free in the same way that you and I are free?
Depends. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be a lawyer. Depends what you mean by free.
Well, by your negative freedom definition, or
someone who's
lenient.
someone who's strung out on heroin is, I suppose, free in the sense that they have the same negative freedoms as everyone else, and so in that sense, I think they're on all fours, equally free, in general.
Right, and I'm right, and that my saying is, or my point would be that that kind of freedom is not something. Who cares then if that case? It's like, oh well, you're free to be strung out on heroin on the street. It's like, well, that's not the kind of, like, to say that that person is as free as I am to pursue like a meaningful life or a fulfilled life. That's what matters more.
I just think that there's an equivocation. I mean, I can care about what you care about too, and just say, well, yeah, you're here, you're pointing to someone where you're not changing some aspect about themselves that bears on their freedom. You're just changing an aspect that bears on their suffering or happiness, or whether or not they're in a good state or a bad state. And it doesn't.
Well, I guess
go for it.
The implication for like the setup of society would be, okay, if the goal is to optimize for freedom, okay, if we're optimizing for negative freedom, then we allow people their free choice to get heroin, and we can set up government things that help them, methadone clinics or whatever, and have Narcan on ambulances and stuff to maximize people's negative freedom. If we're optimizing for positive freedom, we say we'll just get rid of all of it. We'll crack down on the heroin very hard, and we'll lock these people in like asylums and get them clean and force them to get clean to get off heroin. Because ultimately, the use of forcing someone to get off of heroin, I would say, leads to well, obviously there's cases where this can not be the case, but like in theory, like taking away someone's right to do heroin arguably can make them better off in the long run, and that would be a conflation between negative and positive freedom.
I think it's just a question about like what trade-off is acceptable in any given freedom. So like I don't know that I believe in the negative freedom with respect to drug use. I think that drug use is something that the government can and should regulate, and so I'm not entirely convinced. Well, it's because I don't view that as a fundamental freedom, the freedom to ingest certain substances.
Protected by the Constitution? Fundamental? What do you mean fundamental freedom?
Fundamental in court, according to my ethical outlook, as well as the Constitution. I don't think the Constitution protects one's fundamental right to ingest mind-altering substances.
Constitution doesn't protect the right to play video games, but I'm sure we would all agree that it would be bad to just make video games outright illegal.
I'm not sure about that. I think that there's certain expressive activities that are covered.
So it's like funny, actually, even as I say that, in China, they shut off League of Legends and TikTok like certain hours of the day or certain times a week. I would actually be open to that, of like actually we're open to that. I mean, like I'm sympathetic with that sentiment of like maybe the federal government should do things like shut off social media for certain hours of the day or something like that, because it is such a fucking novel, destructive force but it interferes with our freedom. It's like, again, I don't care. And I mean, I agree with you that drugs aren't the kind of freedom, but like aren't the kind of freedom that we should be concerned about. But like, that's just a vibe, though. You're just vibing out on which freedoms are more important than others. Well,
again, I'm inclined and sympathetic to the kind of Alex O'Connor view where he's a moral subjectivist. I don't really understand this notion of stance independent, objective morality.
I'm not approaching it from a stance independent morality.
I gotcha. Yeah, no. So I agree. At the end of the day, we're talking about preferences or some kind of standard, and my standard, I think, is not. I'm not going to say it's absolute, but I will say that I think that there are some rights that matter and some right deprivation that matter, and some things that aren't even rights. So I think that, for example, one has a right to certain forms of expression, and we ought to value that. And I can't ground that out into something objective, but it is a value of mine. I think it's one that's embodied also by the Constitution as well. So, at the end of the day, I guess we're just apes uttering to each other and saying what we like, what we don't like. But
wow,
that's a kind of reductionist view that maybe I'm
not. I don't know. You just went down this route of grounding them.
Okay.
This is very anti-lawyer. That sounds like something I would say, but I'm surprised you're the one bringing this up. I'm not.
Well,
I'm not saying that. I'm asking about the within our totally subjective. I might not be conscious. You might not be conscious. Nobody knows. Blah blah.
Yeah.
Whatever. We'll just assume we're here as we are. Geschwaffenfight or whatever. Thrownness. We're here in this moment. We're discussing like positive freedom versus negative freedom. And I guess the way it ties back to fascists is like, well, people could say, oh, it's my earlier point about people getting called fascists sort of broadly. You could say I could very easily envision a scenario where the government, state or federal or whatever, implements some pretty restrictionist measure on something that I agree with. Like, for example, like clamping down on we have a zero tolerance drug use policy on the streets. And, we put them in prisons or asylums or whatever. People say that's very fascistic. You're having the government round up people who, should have the freedom to do what they want. And that's fascistic. I could very easily see a scenario, and I'm sure this has already happened, where people are, called fascists for wanting to deal with the homeless problem in that regard. Now, of course, there's the Brian Kilmeade.
The drug problem or the homeless problem?
Well, those two are very much related.
I think they're related, but they're not the same. And to get to the objection there, like I think that there's the fascism accusations have to do with the association with authoritarian government. So, for example, you brought up Brian Kilmeade, his comment where it's just like lethal injection. I think people would understand that to be, well, one is he's talking about homelessness by itself and not specifying some other kind of violent tendency or some crime associated with it. So in the sense that you should be free to be homeless in this country, I think that is a freedom worth preserving. Not necessarily being dangerous and be homeless, but
what about like sleeping on public benches and streets and stuff in parks?
I think that there's, I can't give you the right threshold in which like the certain actions that homeless people tend to do should be protected. I'm not sure that you have an unlimited right to use public property, except for certain sort of traditionally held places of like open access, like certain parks and stuff. But so I'm not necessarily saying that sleeping on a bench is protected, but the mere status of being homeless, I think, is not something that the state should be able to punish.
No one's saying that.
Right.
Of course.
So when Brian Kilmeade says the reason why that's fascistic is, one, he's criminalizing something that should be protected. That is, you shouldn't be forced by the government to have a home. And two, he's suggesting lethal injections, which I would take to be a cruel and unusual punishment for that kind of act.
Yes. I thought what Brian Kilmeade said was absurd. And when he said it, I was like, holy shit, that's a fucking deranged line. And I'm glad that at least we're still at the point where he had to come out and apologize. Yeah, but this is this is like, like to say like, yeah, we should just, like if homeless people are fucking camping out in the park, they're like preventing the park from being used by people for its purpose. They should just be cleared out.
I think I get why this relates. I mean, you're basically suggesting, I think this is true, that one's notion of fascism, to the extent that it's indexed to authoritarianism, is going to be indexed on your view of rights. Because obviously what is a rights violation for someone is not a rights violation for someone else. And so an authoritarian, which is one of the concepts contained in fascism, is going to be indexed to a fundamental rights deprivation or a fundamental like institutional violation. And that's going to depend on your view on the proper array of rights and negative freedom. So I understand. I think that's what you're saying, how it relates. And in the end, it's grounded on something where reasonable minds can disagree and on that. But I just think that reasonable minds do agree, at least in the American context, on like freedom of speech, freedom from arbitrary search and seizure. And so there typically is like a starting set of negative freedoms or freedoms that people care about that I assume as part of my conversation. But you could, if you wanted to, undermine that foundation by saying, like, well, why should we care about those things?
No, I mean, I would agree with some of those negative freedoms as well. But I think the positive freedom conception is, I sympathize more with, and that leans more in the fascist direction.
But you're not going to like this, but ultimately how it relates will eventually need to ground down and cash out into an actual meaning or definition of the term fascism. And until you do that, we're not really undermining its application or its potential, whether we should agree with it, right? So in other words, I'm kind of hearing from you that there are two roads to walk down. One in which fascism is good as defined by someone else because it just, it's under the only to the extent that it's undermining freedoms, it's doing so in a way that we shouldn't care about those freedoms, or it's not fascism because it's not undermining freedoms that do matter, and so because they're not freedoms that do matter, they're not freedoms at all, and therefore it's not fascistic because it's not undermining freedom. So I think that that's the road you're going down, but I'm not sure. And it's so hard because there's such an aversion to cashing out fascism. And I'm just, can I ask you a question? Why are you so averse to getting clarity on the meaning?
Because words mean what people think they mean and how they use it.
Agreed.
So you like if we like you and I posited a definition of fascism here.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's irrelevant. No, it has no bearing on the broader discourse.
Would you say that about the term woman?
Would I say that about the term woman? No, because woman is not a complex ideology with like a varying history or whatever. It's like a fundamental category that everyone recognizes.
Well, but it's the same thing, right? Like words are how they're used, and what people have in their minds when they're trying to communicate things, and people can have very different notions of womanhood, in the same way that people can have very different notions of fascism. One of the notions of fascism that you proposed as the way people are probably using it, and by the way, I don't even necessarily disagree that a lot of people are using it this way, is just to say you are a bad person by calling you a fascist. And
I'd say that's
a pretty simple
90% of it.
Okay, but that's a very simple concept, and I actually think women defining sex is a little bit more complicated, or gender, let alone gender, and in fact, I think that gender is one of these concepts, and even for sex, I think it's not as easy as just grounding out into gametes or into chromosomes, because then you can have some really weird edge cases that you need to explain for, and then it's going to get into degrees of proximity. So I think sex and gender are more complicated than people give credit for.
Yes.
No. Even for sex, if I were to ask you the definition of sex, I think you're going to have some trouble.
Everything's complex.
Yes.
Define time. Time is complex. Reality is complex. Consciousness is complex.
That's what I mean.
You're
so
making a statement.
No. All I'm saying is
color, red, or complex. It's like, yeah, also not.
All I'm saying is that every word has this issue, and it doesn't stop you from trying to cash out those words in the context of conversation. But there's a particular kind of like, uncomfort with the term fascism. And I'm just curious, and I'm not even saying there's anything bad. That there's anything bad. I'm just like, I'm wondering what is the hesitation there?
We've been. Hasn't this been the subject of our conversation for 90 minutes?
In a way, but it's like we're talking around it. We're kind of talking around it.
What is my hesitation with like agreeing that Charlie Kirk is a fascist?
No. Of even getting on the table some kind of notion of fascism, and sticking to it and saying, this is what I mean when I say fascist. This is what I mean when I'm saying that they're misapplying it or they're using it in an overly broad fashion.
I don't have a private language.
I'm not saying you do.
I don't use words that mean different. I don't use words. The only reason I use words is because I know other people have definitions, have notions of those words.
I understand that.
So what I mean by fascist is 100% entirely dependent by what people think it means, depending on who I'm talking to. So if I'm talking to a academic who has studied like Giovanni Gentile fascism, okay, not only will we use fascism in a very specific way, we'll use it in a very specific school at a very specific historical place and time. We could do that. I could define that with you right now. We could talk about it. And as I've said now 7 times,
I know
that's not how people are using the term.
But if people are using the term in that way, right? If people are using the term to mean you're a bad person, you said 80, 90%. Maybe that's true. I don't know. I don't know. Then they're not wrong.
It is.
Right? Then they're not. Then you're by your own lights, right? They're not incorrect.
I'm not saying they're wrong.
Okay.
But if you ask me, like, Paul, I want you. This is such a. I love these meta conversations. It's just fun. It's totally unproductive at this point from any like thing. But I love
it too.
I do too. It's just fucking like, it's just like playing Age of Empires 2. It's the same. It's scratching my dopamine of just doing these things. What do we what
So basically,
establishing the notion of fascism, because the reason I'm hesitant to establish a notion of fascism is because I know that the notion of fascism that certainly your audience and certainly that I think most people have is that equals bad person. So if we're going to discuss whether Charlie Kirk meets a definition of fascist, all we're discussing is whether or not Charlie Kirk is a bad person. And maybe that's what how about this?
That's not how I use it, but
do you think Charlie Kirk is a bad or was a bad person?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I didn't like Charlie. If you'd asked me 1 hour before Charlie Kirk, was assassinated, I kind of agree.
Yeah.
He sucks in a lot of ways.
So then you agree he's a fascist under your vision of what most people are using the term fascist to mean.
But I don't want to contribute to such imprecision because again, I think there is room for a discussion around like the opposition to post-liberalism. Like I'm very sympathetic to post-liberalism to the degree that I understand it, and that I think people would label as being fascistic, like I said, for not viewing things in terms of negative freedom, but in terms of positive freedom.
I think there are a lot of people. I want to give you some. Let me give you my. I don't know what's it called. Give you what you want. There are a lot of people who I think don't have clear in their head what the term fascist means, and they're using it because other people are using it.
90 minutes later,
I think that there are such people. That's my intuition. I can't prove it. I think that's also true, by the way, of the term communist. Where people are using it kind of a little bit flippantly. We had a whole discourse on this small corner of the internet about communist versus socialism versus this or that. So that's my intuition there. But I don't think that we're bound by like the lowest common denominator usage of a term. And I certainly am not trying to use it loosely. I'm trying to use it appropriately.
By the most common usage of
I don't think we are. I think we could apply it in a technical way or an academic way or with reference to some sort of some standard.
Who are some fascists that you generally agree with and like?
Oskar Schindler is the one that comes to mind, but even then it's just because
modern day people that are generally described as fascist that you like.
I don't know if I have any. Let me think. That because I like.
I'm positing the definition is fascism equals someone I don't like. So if you can give me an example of someone who is a fascist today,
then that's a contradiction. It can't be.
I'm asking you.
If your view of fascism is not my view, but it's just like the view that you take, which is
fine. Okay. Name me a fascist that by your definition of or however you're using the term fascist,
got it. Yep.
That exists today that you like, and that'll prove to me that you are not using the term in the way that I think most people are using the term.
Got it, because there wouldn't be but that's not entailed though. Just because it's logically possible for there to be a person that I like who's a fascist.
I'm just we're just having a conversation.
No,
wait. Asking you, Pisco.
Yeah.
Who is someone?
I don't know if I have such a person, but that doesn't mean that my definition is what you said. That's not entailed.
Functionally, it seems to be the same.
No, it doesn't.
My theory has accurately predicted.
No, because there are a lot of people I don't. Because there are a lot of people I don't like who I don't call fascist.
True. Yeah. Well, okay. If your fucking ex-girlfriend is a dick or whatever, like I'm not okay. But yes, but not all. What is it?
It's broader than that, right? Like
rectangles are squares, but all squares are rectangles.
I really don't like Anna Kasparian. I wouldn't call her a fascist.
Who is someone that is fascist or that puts forward fascist ideas that you really agree with on things that could be described as fascistic?
On things that could be described as fascistic?
How about this? What are the parts of fascism that you agree with the strongest?
Let me think.
I'm going to clip this, by the way, just so you're aware.
The aspects of fascism that I agree with.
I'm joking, by the way, Pisco.
I don't think of all the concepts that I've identified: ultranationalism, ultraconservatism, myth-making, authoritarianism. I don't think that there's a single one that I've identified. But I can point to good works by fascists that have been done. Right, like there are public works projects that have been good done by fascists. Aesthetically, there's something there. Where they have, who would you rather have, the aesthetics of the Nazis
You're saying there's absolutely nothing that fascists like Giovanni Gentile, whatever, the fascist intellectuals have put forward that you agree with, like in any, like it's something that is like central to them, not just like Hitler loved dogs type thing.
I think that the fact that they stood in opposition generally, or usurping, I wouldn't say necessarily opposition, usurping this kind of landed nobility. So in the context of Nazi Germany, you have the kind of Prussian military class and the Hohenzollern dynasty, where there really wasn't any appetite among them to bring back the Kaiser. In the context of perhaps Rome with the king in Italy, but that's a very loose, like, yeah, I didn't agree with the old imperial dynasties and the old kind of nobility there, but I mean that's about as close to them, where it's a little bit more populist in nature than the previous kind of noble families and royal bloodlines and all that stuff. But it's again, this is a very loose.
You believe in a strong nation state?
In general, yes, I think it's useful. Certainly in the American context.
Right. Do you think you should have to speak English to be a citizen?
No.
Aidez-me.
What? So, for example,
Aidez-me?
What's that mean? Sorry, I don't know. I don't know what you mean.
I think it's Spanish for some. I don't know what it means in English.
Wait, I speak Spanish. What did you say?
Aidez-me.
I speak Spanish. You have to tell me.
My.
Oh, madre mia.
Aidez-me.
Madre
Dios
mia.
mío.
Dios mío. Sí, yeah. Hang on a second. So, for example, there are like insular communities in America that have been around for a long time. Native Americans, I can imagine. Now, they typically speak English, but I don't think it should be necessary, no. You know, think about like
But generally.
Generally, I think you ought to. If you're going to naturalize, I think you should speak English. But
There we go. That's fascistic. Way to go. All right. There's one.
I don't think that's fascistic.
Do you hang around BreadTube ever? Because I can tell you there's some people that call you fascistic.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think I do.
Unfortunately.
Who are the BreadTube people?
You know, it's
Vosh?
so interesting. Vosh, FD Signifier, Philosophy Tube.
Who's the
There's a ton of.
Who's that person? Her name is it Natalie? Natalia? Is it?
Wait, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
You are not super tight with the Hassan Piker audience, correct?
I don't think I'm tight with the Hassan Piker audience.
Ideologically, I forget. I don't mean like.
Depends on what. I think that.
Are there people in Hassan's audience that would call you a fascist for your beliefs? Is there any evidence? Have you experienced this ever?
No, I haven't.
Has anyone in Hassan's audience called someone else's belief fascist that you happen to share? And when I mean Hassan's audience, I mean like the Tinky sphere in general.
They've called Destiny a fascist before, because I asked Destiny a question which was like, who would you vote for, Trump or Hassan? And his first answer on one of his views on what I was asking was Trump. And so they did the whole, when you cut a liberal, a fascist bleeds. And I don't think that Destiny is a fascist. So yes, the answer is yes. I do think that.
Pisco, one of the things that I continually am reaffirmed for myself is just truly how incompetent I am. Because I could have just led with cut a liberal and a fascist bleeds as like the meme that fundamentally exemplifies my point about people getting called fascist.
But I don't know that I disagree with you that sometimes fascism is overused. And certainly if you say is it overused by like lefties, I think the answer is probably yes. But like that's not a disagreement, right? Like that's the disagreement about like whether there's a people misusing the word. But that misuse of the word relies on a shared notion of what the word actually means, right? So like it's impossible to say that the lefties are misusing the word without knowing what the word means, or having or describing what we mean when we use the term and whether it's being misused. So even me saying, right, like, oh, the lefties are misusing it to apply to Destiny, that relies on me having a notion of what fascism is. And I couldn't say that if we were relying, because if they were just saying what you said, which is that they're just describing a bad person, then I would be saying they're not misapplying it. They're correct that Destiny is a fascist if what they mean by fascist is this is a bad person, and I'm sure that they think that Destiny is a bad person. You know?
Yeah, okay. I understand your.
I'm sorry.
I understand your philosophy of linguistics, and we just disagree.
I'm not trying to be difficult, man. And I really love this conversation.
I do too. That's why I'm entertaining it. It's like I said. It's like golf, Age of Empires. It's just, even though it's arbitrary in some sense, there's just something fun about it.
So would you call anyone today a fascist?
Would I call anyone today a fascist? It depends on the context. Like, it's like, would I call someone, would I ever describe someone as toxically masculine? Depends on what my goals are. If I'm trying to appeal to anyone of any level of, like, if I'm trying to appeal to the kind of person, who is actually like misogynistic and kind of, leans into the Andrew Tate direction, I probably wouldn't use the term toxically masculine, because it's such a loaded term that causes me to lose credibility.
Same thing with, like, neo-Nazi. Would you call a self-described neo-Nazi a fascist?
Yeah. Oh yes. Oh yeah. There's people that have swastikas on their neck.
Okay.
Those people are Nazis. But like, it's like snowflake. It's like, would I call people snowflakes? Even if I do believe that there are people who are like emotionally weak, it's like I would never use the term snowflake, because as soon as I do, it signals that I'm operating in a linguistic framework that is used by people whose ideology I do not share. So like, I would never even I don't think because I don't believe there's any utility for what I'm doing, I wouldn't call Charlie Kirk a fascist, I don't think.
Even if you fit your notion of fascism by your favorite notion of fascism.
My favorite notion.
Whatever the meaning is.
Okay, again, this is for the reasons that we have different linguistic philosophies, just fundamentally. Yeah. So because I operate in a certain linguistic philosophy, which is words mean whatever effect they have. Words mean whatever notion comes to mind in the person who listens to that word from the speaker. That's it. There are no objective meanings to words independent of anything.
Yeah, but you're hesitant for Charlie Kirk in a way. You're hesitant in a way with Charlie Kirk in a way that you're not with the neo-Nazi. You just said, of course I would call a neo-Nazi with swastikas a fascist. Correct.
Yeah, because the fucking neo-Nazis have fucking swastikas on their fucking neck and say, we fucking...
But you didn't have this, you didn't stop and pause and be like...
I don't think Charlie... Yeah. Yes. Okay, all right, fair enough. I'll tell you exactly why. Because some 50% of people like Charlie Kirk and agree with Charlie Kirk. So for me to call Charlie Kirk a fascist would be to signal, hey, I'm as simple... my analysis of Charlie Kirk is as reductionist as the Hassan people who say scratch a liberal and a fascist.
And this, I think, is the ultimate. What I think is the sticking point. What you just said is because some percentage of people agree with Charlie Kirk, I am not going to call him a fascist. In other words, it's no more. Well, that's what it feels like.
No, that's not what I said.
All right, help me out.
I said because in order to fulfill my goals, which are communicate with people who are Charlie Kirk sympathizers, calling him a fascist would prevent me from being able to reach them in ways that I think are valuable.
Right. So because I want to reach them, I'm not going to call him a fascist, even if he is.
No, because you're sneaking the even if he is thing at the end.
That's what you.
Because even if he is implies.
No, it doesn't.
That there is a fixed definition of fascism. The fact that so many. Okay,
but that applies to the neo-Nazi with the same force as it does Charlie Kirk, and the only difference there between the difference there is that the most of the population doesn't agree with the neo-Nazi, and so that's the difference. So the only thing that I'm changing, like the whole language and philosophy stuff is the same.
Pisco.
Yeah.
Yes, words mean what most people think they mean.
Yeah.
So if half the country likes Charlie Kirk. And it's like, okay, well, Charlie, I'm going to call Charlie Kirk's a fascist for sure. Charlie Kirk's definitely a fascist, whatever. It's like, I become as one-dimensional and stupid as the people saying "scratch a liberal" in the fascist.
So the Germans,
I'm not going to operate in that linguistic framework.
The Germans in Weimar Republic who were calling Hitler a fascist, they were stupid because 50% of the country seems to like this guy.
Well, they probably should have come up with a better way to address Hitler than fucking just call him names. Wouldn't you agree?
Whether they should have or not isn't the point.
My whole point is calling people names is a fucking useless way to contend with their ideas. And that's all we seem to do nowadays. Oh, this person's a fascist. We can rule them out of the conversation. Scratch a liberal, fascist bleeds. We just can ignore them. I mean, this is the whole problem on the left, is like the Democrats have too many people in their party who just think that fucking Kamala Harris is basically a fascist or whatever. So like...
So when Trump called Kamala a fascist, what'd you think of that?
I liked it as much as when Kamala called Trump a communist dictator. Did you see that?
Wait, no, I didn't see that. I saw when I think Trump was like, she's a communist. He's a communist. I think Trump called Kamala Harris a man. I could be wrong about that.
I bookmarked this. I'll just send it to you.
Trump does, listen, if you want to tell a fascist that sometimes I enjoy, Trump makes me laugh sometimes, man. I mean, I hate Trump, and I think that he's one of the worst political figures I've ever had, but he has some bangers, and you can't deny that.
That's true. Yeah, I just think, like, for example, Pisco, you tell me if you disagree.
Mm-hmm.
The probability that you would ever convince a Trump supporter, well, how should I say this? I think you are not nearly as good as criticizing Trump to the people that matter as me, because the people because I'm much more willing to not call Charlie Kirk a fascist and not throw these terms around. I can operate within the more Trump sympathetic
because I don't
framework
pander
and
to
point out
them.
how-
I mean, I don't pander to them. I'm
Well, you call it pandering, and I call it sympathizing with their valid perspectives.
valid meaning true.
Valid meaning valid.
I understand validity to relate to arguments and whether the conclusion follows.
Veracity is a function of veracity is one factor in a multivariate analysis that leads to validity.
Oh, okay.
I'd be a good lawyer.
I think
I actually studied law, and
I think it's possible. Listen, I'm not necessarily the best communicator to MAGA, and part of the reason that is like I talk shit about MAGA every single day.
Yeah, and look, I'm not the best at communicating to the Hassan Piker audience because I shit talk them all the time. So we are. It's literally like two. I'm like there's just a. Again, this conversation is useful for me. Just it's productive. It's fun to talk to loyally minded people. We just have a different. Like for example, one of the reasons I'm much less inclined to criticize Nick Fuentes to the degree that other people might is because I know there's a lot of people who like Nick Fuentes who I could convince that he does go too far in certain areas that other people couldn't, precisely because I'm not willing to just go, oh well, he's a racist, therefore he's a fuck him and all that.
Do you think Nick Fuentes is a racist?
Yeah, probably.
Do you think he's anti-Semitic?
By any normal person's definition, yeah.
By yours?
Yeah, sure, yes.
But
it's like, but again, it's like asking me, do I think Andrew Tate's toxically masculine? It's like, I would never. I don't like. I think even just agreeing to that and saying that is kind of buying into a framework that I'm just like. I don't
why
believe
did
in
you
the framework of
grant
calling
it
people's
that?
names.
I think you granted that because Fuentes is considered very toxic and hands off in a way. Kirk maybe has more mainstream appeal, but it is suffering by
I think
the
Nick
same.
Fuentes is like borderline as mainstream now as Charlie Kirk.
I think it's getting bigger too, but I just mean to say is you should have stopped me there. You should have said, I'm not going to call him anti-Semitic because how am I going to communicate to his audience to convince them of my ways?
Maybe I should stop accepting it. This is why I suck at debate, Pisco, because I just accept everyone's frames because I'm such a nice guy.
But I would just say be honest.
So
but you answered that question where you were like, yeah, I mean, I have a notion of anti-Semitism and I think probably meets it and under most normal people, but you weren't willing to do that with Charlie Kirk. And I think that has to do with your intuition about which one would carry more opprobrium for yourself. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I think that if you were to say, listen, I don't want to talk about whether Nick Fuentes is an anti-Semite, people, you're seeing, you're like, oh, people are going to accuse me of being anti-Semitic.
I agree. Yeah. So opprobrium for myself. I communicate in a way to try and reach certain people. I think have much more appeal to right-wingers than you do. So what you call opprobrium, it's like, well, you don't want to use toxic masculinity because if you don't use toxic masculinity, people will call you, well, you must like Andrew Tate or something, or misogynistic. It's like, you can frame it that way. I think it's fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, but you just threw Nick under the bus. You called him racist, probably racist. He doesn't self-identify as racist. He says Christ teaches us to love all people.
I think he does. I think he just says it doesn't matter.
I watch America First.
I could just lawyer you up here and just say define anti-Semitism, define racism, define all that stuff.
Well, I was asking your
people
notion.
Think they mean.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, like, you were willing to answer the question
because he's anti-Semitic because he says, I think one of the most obvious, or not most obvious, the most useful examples to point to that would appeal, in my opinion, one of the most useful examples to point to is the degree to which he says Dave Smith is a Jewish psyop. Dave Smith is one of the loudest and best critics of Israel and the Israeli relationship to the U.S. government. And Nick Fuentes, because he has a notion of Jews that is this highly conspiratorial, Jews are involved in everything, and if a Jew criticizes Israel, it's actually controlled opposition, blah, blah, blah stuff. The fact that he says Dave Smith is a Jewish psyop is emblematic of the most delusional type of stuff that I think would be fairly described as anti-Semitic. But it's like,
all I'm raising is the potential inconsistency.
I'm much more inclined to say Nick Fuentes is a fucking idiot and moron for putting out the idea that Dave Smith is a Jewish psyop, rather than just saying it's anti-Semitic or racist, because, again, calling people's names doesn't change anyone's opinions.
Well, that's what I'm saying is, like, I think that the inconsistency that I'm potentially pointing to is a lot of people will say of the term anti-Semite or racist, it is used in this way that you're accusing fascist the term being used.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. Like Norman Finkelstein is called anti-Semitic, and fucking, like, everyone's called anti-Semitic if you criticize Israel.
But you were willing to engage in an analysis about whether Fuentes is anti-Semitic in a way that you weren't with Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, correct. Because yes, because there's a very different, because anti-Semitism is a much more
coherent concept.
No, but I would say it's more fundamental to the average person than the ideological notion of fascism.
I don't understand whether there's something can be more fundamental without understanding what fascism is. Like, to say something is more X than this other term, you would need to know what that term means, right? It's like
no. Calling someone a racist or racist and anti-Semite are like fundamental moral categories in Western civilization.
How do you know fascism isn't without knowing what it means?
Okay.
In order to know if something is fundamental,
I have to piss like a racehorse.
No worries.
This is now the 15th time we've done this.
Okay. Hey, listen, this was a lot of fun. We should do it again.
It's always fun. Pisco.
And let me know because if you have a follow-up on the specific questions about executive power, unitary executive theory, FDR stuff.
All right. So, there's someone named Dave Green, the distributist, who is post-liberal, I think far-right reactionary type person who I like a lot.
Yeah, send me his stuff.
Makes a lot of good points. Would you watch his stuff and then let me know.
Dave Green, you said?
Dave Green, the distributist.
I'm typing it in our DMs, so I'll remember it. Dave Green, the distributist.
Because I think because I would like to see more intelligent. Because clearly, Pisco, I'm not intelligent and capable of arguing.
I don't think that's true.
I just like trying on ideas. But Dave has a more fleshed out worldview. So maybe we can set up a conversation between the three of us and be moderated and go from
Awesome. There. Hey, thank you so much, Paul. This was so lovely. Let's do it again. We'll talk soon, okay?
Godspeed, Pisco.
All right, later. I think there's a problem here. I think that there's a problem. And the problem is equivocation, and the problem is not agreeing on what we're talking about. And this happens a lot. Like on the term insurrection, where we're having this discussion with Rob Noor or Andrew Wilson, they'll say something like, well, if that's your definition of insurrection, that would include so many things. And it sounds like what they're doing is providing a normative argument for why a word should be one thing versus another. But then you parse out their language a little bit more, because they claim to be, oh, I don't have a definition. And they'll say things like this. They'll say, well, anti-Semitism is more fundamental than fascism. So I'm willing to opine on anti-Semitism in a way that I'm not willing to opine on fascism. Well, in order to say that something is like more fundamental, surely you have a notion for what that means, right? Same thing with like the term insurrection versus riot. At one point in Andrew Wilson's conversation with Destiny, Andrew Wilson says, oh, I am agnostic on what the term means. I don't have to have a definition. But he says that the concept that you described, Destiny, better fits the term riot. Well, the better there, right, is referencing something, right? It can't be a self-stand. I don't understand something like better than, which is like stance neutral or in like viewpoint neutral. Like something, saying something is better than something else. It's referring to something. To say that that concept better fits riot, you would have to have a self-standing notion for what riot means or what it should mean or what insurrection means or ought to mean. That there's an archetype perhaps that you're referencing. Like you can't say these things like, well, that concept better fits riot unless you have a notion of language that makes sense of the utterance riot and the utterance insurrection. Same thing here, right? You're quite willing to opine on communism and say communism bad and this person is a communist and these commies on BreadTube, etc. But less willing so with fascist, even though the same objections that you raise, well, people just use the term fascist to be negative. Well, that's a conversation about like how words, like the intention behind the usage, not necessarily the usage itself. But even if you grant that all they're saying is this person is bad, then you're admitting that they're not wrong, right? Because if all fascism means is you're a bad person, then they're correct about that in their mind, right? They're subjectively correct about that. But it doesn't mean that, because people don't call everyone they don't like fascist. Maybe some people do. But if you're walking down the street and you see someone and he's like being an asshole to you, you call him a fascist? All else equal? No. Like there are plenty of people I don't like. I gave an example, Anna Kasparian, who I don't call a fascist. And so I think that there are multiple conversations running. I think that he's trying to get me on some consistency trap, but I know all of them, right? Like I know this whole like, well, Hitler took power and he killed all the Jews. And I know this kind of like is racial ideology essential to fascism. And I try to separate those concepts out of my mind, Nazism versus fascism. I try to explain that it's a cluster concept. And he, I think, is quite unwilling to put a pin on what he means by the term fascism. And he outright said why, right? He said, the reason is because I want to be able to communicate to these people. And 50% of the people like agree with someone whom, you know, is a question about whether there's a fascist. Hell's advocate said, this is why Rob Noor is never willing to define anything. It's much easier to just arbitrarily move on and off points. Yeah, true, 100%. 100% on the stolen election bit. Yeah, totally agree. And the minute, right, like if you're able to identify what's going on there, you can see how quickly it falls apart. And all these weird kind of phrases that don't actually make sense unless you have a notion of insurrection or fascism or any one of these other concepts. And then, right, like presumably, I don't know that he has stuff about trans people, but a lot of these like enlightened centrist types or commentary class people have these views on transgender issues where they raise the objections to the people who are like, well, the word woman means this or that. What they'll often raise like, well, you can't make the term woman mean that. I'm not sure if this would include PF Jung, but Paul says like, well, woman is a more concrete thing. Well, hang on. How do you know woman is a more concrete thing without knowing what fascism is, right? Like any kind of symmetry breaker or symmetry maker with the term is going to rely on a meaning of the term. And so until you, like you could just, maybe you could take the view that calling something fascist, regardless of what people are using it as, it should never be done. It should be, the word should be as a racial slur because it has such disastrous consequences. But then that's like kind of like an empirical case you're going to have to make. That independent of the words, that's why I kept saying like, so you're saying that you would not call Charlie Kirk a fascist even if he was one. That seemed to really bother him because it's kind of a tough sell to be like, you shouldn't call people what they are unless it breaks some threshold of good taste, like the N-word or the F-slur, right? But it's a hard sell to be like, don't call something what it absolutely is. Don't call something a communist because it might make me feel bad that you called it communist. And most, I would say, conservative-leaning or conservative-appealing people, they're the ones who are like the truth tellers, right? We want to be honest with people. We deal with dangerous ideas here, but true ideas always. And so there's this aversion to what I think if you're not going to take on or cash out a notion of fascism or any one of these other terms, you would have to kind of embrace, I think, a view of words that like we shouldn't use them even when they clearly fit.